right. Well, thank you, John, and great to sort of be invited by Community Futures to come in and do a bit of talking about starting nonprofits. I am Mike Grogan. I work with Integral Org, and we are a charity and nonprofit. And our job is to help folks like this. That's all we do is we work with charities and nonprofits. We do strategy work, board governance work, some legal work, and leadership development are our four areas. We work across the province. Today I'm in Calgary, but depending where you find us, we tend to wander across the province. And really, our job is to come in and meet you where you're at and to say, if you've got a question like the questions you brought for today, let's have a conversation. If it's as simple as a conversation, then great, you're coming on and you're doing great things. If it's more in-depth work where we're working with you over time, there's lots of ways we do that too. So our entire job is to help you be better nonprofits and charities. So when John reached out to us, say, can we start with maybe a session on how to start a nonprofit, and know that you folks probably already have a nonprofit and we do a bit of that. But to go through kind of what that means, this idea of what a nonprofit is kind of tricky. I'll probably spend more time on funding a nonprofit. That's kind of the second part of my presentation, just some general stuff. But happy along the way. If there's any questions, please, this isn't just me talking for an hour. That's the last thing you want to hear. So if there's questions or thoughts, put up your hand, turn your camera on, put them in the chat, whatever it is. I might ask you a few things to weigh in on here. So we'll go from there. And then afterwards, again, if there's things we don't get to, let's figure out those things. So let me figure out how to share a screen. There's this one. It's always an adventure when I share screens, I find. So let me just click on the right thing here. Come on. Can we see the screen? Does it say planning a nonprofit?
Yep.
Ooh, that's always the first thing. Now I'm good. So there we go.
I'm actually seeing your speaker notes.
Okay, that's what I do wrong. So let's stop sharing that screen, perhaps you're saying, and share the right one again. So thank you for bearing with me. I usually have somebody help me with this stuff, which is, okay, back over to share. There we go. So let's try this one and make it big. How's that?
Yeah, it's your
screen.
it's your personal screen.
I'm surprised that I was so inept at this. This is why we have Sandeep here. I'll give you one more shot here to try this the right way. So nothing yet, eh? Still seeing me? So and the problem is I can't share my screen right now for some reason, the right one. Well, you're going to get the notes screen if that's what we're going to do. That's life and better than nothing right now. So let me share something with you better than messing around with other things here. Okay. We'll make it as good as we can here. Okay. My apologies, folks. Usually want to be a little more professional than this. So just, when we talk about planning a nonprofit, there's lots that goes into this. And again, we sort of talk through this stuff. Questions along the way, please do let us know. Want to acknowledge that we're having these conversations today across Alberta, and these are treaty lands. And we're out of Calgary today, so where we tend to focus on Mohkinstsis. This is the confluence of the Bow and the Elbow rivers, and the gathering place in the homelands, the traditional lands of the Bearspaw First Nation and the Métis regions of Alberta District 6. So as we have these conversations today, they recognize when we talk about nonprofits that we're gathering on land that people have had these conversations for millennia. How will we live in community? How will we serve each other? What can we do to honor the people around us and the world around us? And I hope that probably infuses some of our work today in this area. So just today, we're going to talk about planning a nonprofit, incorporating things like that. We'll go through a few things. I may jump around a bit with a smaller crowd, but fair enough. That's what we're going to do. Just a question for you. How many nonprofits? You want to throw this in the chat? That'd be fantastic. Just throw me a number. How many nonprofits are there in Alberta? When you think about these things called nonprofits, I'll explain what those are in a minute. But John, feel free to play with this one too. But how many nonprofits do we have in this wonderful province of ours? Sorry, I'll give you an answer that I don't do that. So any question, any thoughts? Throw them in the chat if you can. There's the chat popping up for me. Over 1,000, I would say that's probably pretty true. Any other thoughts on how many nonprofits we may or may not have? Well, I will move on. Oh, 1,200, there we go, thank you, Jennifer. I'd say John is right, there are over 1,000, that's for sure. Right now in Alberta, there are about 30,000 nonprofits active in Alberta. Most of those registered within Alberta, incorporated within Alberta, sorry. And some incorporate other jurisdictions would offer here. If you think that's a lot of nonprofits, that's because that's a lot of nonprofits. We tend to create more nonprofits in Alberta than probably any place in Canada, maybe any place in the world. We have a lot of nonprofits per capita. The challenge is, though, is that it's hard to sustain 30,000 nonprofits. It's hard to find the people and the money and even the bandwidth to get your message out there. There's not 30,000 different causes out there. So there's lots of sort of overlap and duplication and confusion. So recognizing that starting a nonprofit is usually fairly easy, maintaining it and over time is a lot harder to sort of move forward on here. And you know that a lot of times the nonprofit, the structure of the sector is different. We talk about those 30,000 nonprofits, they tend to congregate into things like religious organizations or sports and rec organizations, things like that. And they cover a lot of ground. So what a nonprofit is it can be almost anything. It can be arts, it can be mental health, it can be environmental, it can be community associations, it can be booster clubs, it can be a whole bunch of things. And so that's why some of the basics are good to get down, what a fundamental, really well done nonprofit needs to do, but it also gets to be a really crowded space, a really confusing space, and one that is hard to sort of perhaps work through over time here. Do you see begin with why? What do you see on your screen? I see different things on my screen than I'm seeing right now. What do you see, John? Oh, you're muted there, John. Sorry. Yep.
I see the question, how many nonprofit are there in Alberta?
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, why is it showing? Well, I'm going to pretend it's this one then. It's interesting. I want to advance my little screen here in the way that I want it to do. So that's. How about now? What are you seeing, John? Sorry for this. Begin with why?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. One of the things we talk about, certainly in nonprofits, is you got to start with why. And I think that is a really good question. We get a lot of folks coming to us every day saying, I want to start a nonprofit, and you know, I got a great dream for something, and all nonprofits really dream. So that really understanding not just the why it's important to you, but why it may be important to other people. And that's really challenging sometimes, because I think sometimes we think this is my thing, this is what I want to do. We realize that there may be other people out there that are quite similar to what we do. So that starting with why is really important, and really being as objective and as sort of almost brutally honest as you can with yourself to say, is this something that the community really needs, and can we build and sustain this thing? Because it's building, again, starting is easy, building's tougher. So things you want to talk about: who else is doing the work? What's the goal of the work? Who will you serve? Sometimes you have some general ideas. Sometimes you're going to be, but you want to be as clear and specific as you can on these things. Where will you do your work? Are you locally focused? Are you across the country, across the province? What activities will you do? Where are they going to take you? And where will the money come from? I'm going to talk about money a fair bit at the end here, but a lot of times what we will see is people saying, I want to start a nonprofit, and I assume there's going to be money out there. Money is tough. It's tough these days. It's tough for all of us. So that's what we talk about, sustainably starting these nonprofits, 30,000 nonprofits. Every year in Alberta, about 1,500 new nonprofits start up. The challenge is after 5 years, maybe a third of those are gone. After 10 years, maybe half of those are gone. So again, starting is easy, and it usually comes down to money. It's how do we fund these things over time? So before we sort of head down that path, we try to think through where is the money can come from in a really well thought out way, not just we hope that corporations will pay for this or government. They may, and I'll talk about why they do or don't. But that idea is asking some really hard, honest questions. And that first question about who else is doing this work is important. And it may mean that you partner with somebody starting, you join the organization. Maybe you recognize that, yes, somebody else is doing this work and we're going to compete with them. And there's going to be 3 organizations in a community doing the same thing. That's not necessarily bad. I don't think that's the wrong thing. There's lots of businesses that are duplicating services. but it's the idea for donors, for funders, for clients, sometimes that gets a little trickier. So start with why, ask yourself some tough questions and say, okay, this really does seem like something we should do. And then it's time to perhaps move forward. So when we talk about starting a nonprofit, we talk about two different pieces. There is incorporation, and incorporation is a legal status. It is like becoming a business. It is the legal sort of piece that holds your organization. So we are a nonprofit under the Companies Act. I'll explain what that means. Some are under the Societies Act. This is the legal thing that holds the organization, which is really good. It is distinct, though, from a charity. A charity is a separate process, and it is run by the federal government. Most of the incorporation stuff is provincial. The federal, the CRA, the charity stuff is a tax status. So the incorporation under these acts like the Societies Act and the Companies Act are in Alberta or federally. Those are the legal things that give you some protection. The charity piece is more of a tax status, and that allows you to generate tax returns. It allows you to receive money from other charities generally. So that's the difference. So when we talk about 30,000 nonprofits in Alberta, what we also need to recognize is that only about 9,000 of those are charities. So not everything good in society is charitable. Charitable really has to do with things like alleviation of poverty, advancement of religion, education, and this general other thing, which includes health and those kind of things. So recognizing that charities tend to get more money, nonprofits not as much because they don't have the access. But they're two separate processes. Almost every charity begins with an incorporation. So you set up the legal entity first, and then you decide whether you want to be a charity or not. So in Alberta, there's a few ways to do this. This is some advantages, and this is why people incorporate. This is why you start a nonprofit. It allows you to do things like enter into contracts. You know, if I'm doing something by myself and I want to do an event in the community, you know, I can sort of sign up and rent a space, do things, but I'm taking that liability on myself. The nonprofit becomes a legal entity that enters into contracts and buy and sell things, which is a risk management tool. So if I do an event and I do things out in the community, which is great, nice to support community, but I'm incurring all the risk. I've got now a nonprofit that I've incorporated. It sort of sets an intermediary and it absorbs the risk, not me. Not fully, but largely. So you have protection for liability. So if you're incorporated as a nonprofit, you have some protection from being sued. And unfortunately, that does tend to happen. It also makes it a little more long going. So that structure of having an entity helps you keep going over time. If it's just me, I may or may not lose interest and move on, but that legal entity needs to be maintained, and so that gives me some continuity. It also gives you more credibility with funders, with donors. No one's going to give me a donation, but they will give it to a nonprofit or give me a contract. So you do have some ability to be safer, to enter into longer term agreements. There's some things about membership, who joins and who doesn't can be in there as well. So the idea that it gives you a vehicle, a platform to do your work that is safer, longer term, and more credible, perhaps. There's some disadvantages though, and we see this a lot. It's not that everything, you have to give some things up to incorporate as a nonprofit. So there are constraints. You can't just do whatever you want. And this becomes more apparent if you become a charity. So a nonprofit, you can do some broader good things in the community. If you become a charity, it's very narrow. And as a charity, you can only do things that are in your charitable purposes. So there are some advantages of being a charity, but some disadvantages too. If you want to sort of be nimble and do a bunch of different things, being a nonprofit is maybe where you want to stop the process. It does take time to build a nonprofit. So to be a board, to do things like the fundraising, those are taking time, but also to maintain the organization. So doing the work, all the good work that people want to do is fantastic, but you got to sort of take care of your own house, build a board, do your policy work, do your filings, those kind of things. It's not necessarily onerous, but it does take some time. It's not necessarily that straightforward sometimes. And so you got to file some things corporately in Alberta. You got to file a return every year. It's really not that hard, but it's not just all easy to do sometimes. So there's some things you need to think about. You know, in Alberta, there's a lot of ways you can incorporate in Alberta. We have a few different acts. One is the Societies Act, so 30,000 nonprofits, about 75% of this is Societies Act, and then the Corporations Act. I'll touch briefly on these two, and you've already incorporated folks in this call, so I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time, but just some advantages. Societies Act, this is the big one. This is the one that's most nonprofits under this, and it's really most of the things we think about as nonprofits. They're societies. They're doing good things for other people. So benevolent, philanthropic, or charitable, those are things. We're doing stuff for others. It can't just be a service club for myself and my friends. It's got to have some sort of public benefit to it as well. The big thing is, though, as a society, you're not supposed to carry on a commercial activity. You can't sell products, and nonprofits can sell products. It's what we do. We sell some services here and there, but that's not designed for the Societies Act. So if you're going that route, there are other options. But if you're planning on charging fees for things and make commercial activities, there's some things you want to think about in advance for that. Okay? And the biggest point of every nonprofit, doesn't matter what act you're under, is you can't give money to individuals. If you make money as the organization, that goes back into the nonprofit. It doesn't go to the owners or directors or shareholders. That's what a nonprofit is you don't get money individually. You can work for a nonprofit, fair enough. But the idea of being the owner and getting a dividend or getting a return that way, that's entirely what a nonprofit is set up not to do. So the Companies Act is a bit of a different beast. It is more where most companies in this province are on the Alberta Companies Act. And there's a part of that where it is the nonprofit part of it, called Part 9. And if you're a nonprofit that actually wants to engage in commercial activities, we sell some consulting services. So we are a Part 9 company. If you think about that, and it may be that you want to sell counseling services or run a small business as part of it, there's ways to do that. And the Companies Act, because of the Corporate Act, allows you to do that. But again, any profits go back into the organization. They don't go to the individual shareholders or members in this case. So those are the things. But to recognize it, though, that's one of the things. If you're going commercial, Companies Act, Corporate Act's really good. The last one is called the Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act. Another way, it's federal. And so it's a more modern act. It's cleaner, it's faster, it's cheaper to go this way. It allows you to do commercial activities. So it's a company act. If you go this route, it's probably the cleanest way to start a nonprofit. You just need to register in Alberta as well, which is really just filling out paperwork kind of thing. So it allows you to do some things in a quicker way. This is where a lot of new nonprofits are heading into this act. So a bit of a question. This is another chat one for you, if I can find the chat again here. Just where do nonprofits and charities get their money from? Tell me when you think about maybe the ones you're working with, but where does money come from for nonprofits and charities? Throw an answer into the chat and let's see what we can come up with here, and then I'll pull this apart a little bit here. Chat, anything comes up here? Where do we get our money from, perhaps? Donations, thank you, Heidi. Yeah, donations is a part of it. Community events, yeah, we do some things like fundraisers or conferences or galas, anything standing that way. Federal funding or membership fees, yep, absolutely. There's some things that come up with that way. There's lots of ways to fund nonprofits. And the type of nonprofit you are really depends on where your money's going to come from or where you might get it from. So I'm going to maybe unpack this a bit on the funding side of it here and see, is there anything that we can learn from that? Big sources for nonprofit stuff, I think you named a lot of these. Earned revenues, that is, we're selling something. And that may be a service where we're charging a sport, like sports organizations. You would charge a fee for your kid to play sports at. Well, that's earned revenue. That's what we call that. A counseling service might charge a subsidized rate for counseling. That's earned revenue. Things like that, where we earn our money. Government funding, named in there for sure. Different orders of government, local government, provincial government, federal government. Big source of funding, especially for charities, a little more in that bent than nonprofits. But yeah, a big chunk of it. Philanthropic support, and it was named as donations in there. And philanthropic can be a few different, it's individuals giving donations. It is through intermediaries like a community foundation or another way, or corporations. That's one source. And then kind of a general other one, people save money, get interest, those kind of things. Of this though, in Alberta, we have this one. This is the model in Alberta. This is sort of a bit dated, the data, but I think that this pie is going the same. About half of the money earned by nonprofits in Alberta is earned income. So earned income, selling things, charging fees, is the biggest single source of money. Now, it could be a whole bunch of different sort of areas of stuff, but we tend to earn more than Alberta. Other provinces would have higher reliance on government funding. We have the lowest reliance on government funding across the entire sector. Now, some subsectors like in health or human services, mental health, get a lot of government funding, some get none. The other part is government. So about half comes from earned revenue selling things. About a third comes from different orders of government, largely provincial government, but some municipalities and federal as well. And then individuals and corporations. So when we say donations, yeah, writ large, the donations are about 10% of the sector. Corporations, about 4% of the funding of the sector. Now, corporations tend to get a lot of bang for their buck, a lot of press on the stuff they do. but they don't fund a ton of stuff in the sector. And they tend to concentrate into very niche areas. Large organizations, ones that fit their brand, fair enough, that's their choice. But this is where the overall funding model comes from. Now that may change though, as you look at different types of them. Just know there's no one way to do this, right? There are a lot of ways to fund nonprofits. You want to be compliant, especially if you're a charity, it's a little trickier. So, but to say we're locked into one way of doing things, that's not true at all. There's lots of ways to doing things. So your focus, or the community you live within, the values you have, all those things, regulatory things, they play into your funding model. But one of those things you want to think about, whether you're starting a nonprofit or every day, I think about the funding model down here in Taylor. How do we sort of continue on in a way that's honoring and respectful and compliant and still sustainable? But one of the things you need to think about though is that if I'm going down the earned revenue route, I want to earn it like a business, then I need some skills in that area, some capacities in that area. If I want to go get donations, I maybe need fundraisers. So the way you build your nonprofit or your board or your volunteers kind of fits your funding philosophy along the way. And over time, we all tend to sort of move towards one dominant source of funding, whether that's donations, something like the Ronald McDonald House across Alberta, largely donations. That's been their model. If you're a sports organization, you're probably getting most of your money from earned revenue, from tuition, from fees, from showing up for camps and stuff like that. If you're a group that's working in seniors care or disabilities, you're probably getting most of your money from government sources. So as you grow, you don't want to be all in one source of funding, but you're going to find something that's more of a dominant one. And that's how you'll build some of your skills along the way. If you want to just take a look, this is just a tool. We'll give you the PowerPoint later. If you want to go look where people get their money from, it's always one of the more interesting things. If they're a charity, and charities are a bit different than nonprofits, but you can look up any charity and to see where their money comes from. Maybe not exactly where it comes from the donors, but in these two databases, one called Charity Data and one's just the CRA website. And I spend a lot of time on this when I'm working with new clients, new organizations, and even working with organizations who aren't charities, to say, this is an organization that's similar to you. You might want to go look and see where their money comes from, how they structured themselves. So these are just two dashboards, and they have, if I'm a charity, I have to give my money, my data to the government, and it goes up on these dashboards. So you can sort of see, well, where are people they're getting a lot of money from United Way or things like that. So there's some good insights into how people structure their nonprofits financially. It's not all hidden away. And so things like this is an organization that, and we pull stuff from these sites, you can see that this organization gets a lot of government funding, a little bit from other charities, and this would be a human service organization. So you get lots from government. Some groups will get nothing from government. Conversely, this one is one that gets a lot of non-receipted donations, or probably earned income, we would call that. The government tends to call things a little bit different than this. This one's a sports organization. We're not getting very much from government. We're getting most of it earning ourselves. So again, the focus of your organization is going to drive a lot of the funding things you're going to get. In each of these buckets, though, there's things you need to think about. So philanthropic funding, money from individuals with donations, corporations and sponsorships, or through intermediaries, we call them, which are community foundations or United Ways, things like that. So the money that sort of goes from individuals or entities into a foundation that comes to you is still philanthropic funding. So this is a way. Overall, this is 15% or so of the funding in the sector in Alberta. Large organizations tend to take a lot of this, but it's a great source for anybody. Small organizations, small donations, small involvement. There's lots of ways to sort of gain access to this kind of funding. So a charitable donation, if you're a charity, this is what we're used to in terms of donations. And this is the advantage of becoming a charity, is that you are able to get charitable donations and give a tax receipt for them. So it's a donation of cash, usually sometimes property, that helps the organization accomplish their goals. So we are a charity in Tegawark. If somebody writes me a check and says, we want to support your work, great, we'll give a tax receipt for that. We don't get a lot of those. We don't do a lot of donations ourselves, but it is the advantage of being a charity, is you can receive money from individuals. Thank you, Heidi. Grants are another way of sort of seeing funding. So sometimes people give grants, community foundations in other ways, give grants to support a piece of your work. And that is another way of getting money from these philanthropic sources, larger community organizations like United Way and community foundations. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Just some things on donations. I think, when we talk about donations in Canada, they are a great source of revenue, but there's some challenges this way. So donations have been falling or flat for well over a decade. people generally give less money than they used to give. So if the model we're thinking about in our nonprofit is we're going to get lots of donations, fantastic. There's still probably $2 billion a year of sponsorships and donations in Alberta every year from corporations and individuals. 90% of that goes to really large organizations, universities, and large organizations. So the remaining 10%, it's fairly competitive, but people are just not giving as much. And the donations are being concentrated into larger organizations. So this idea that we can fundraise or get donations is valuable, but to go to scale, it's much more challenging as a small organization. It'd be almost impossible for me to run Integral World on donations. It's not that type of organization. So we need to recognize that this idea of people giving money to charities is still important, but it's diminishing over time and it's not going to come back, I don't think, in the same way. Okay. But there are some good things out there. I mean, there are some things that online donations, the ways of giving individually are sort of getting better. It's no longer you get a letter in the mail and you send a check back. Online donations using social media platforms or really fast interactive platforms are increasing, and that's nice. What we're seeing too is maybe that even though the pie is not getting bigger for donations, different causes are rising to the top, and that's really good. So Indigenous EDI issues, things like that, 10 years ago, probably not getting a lot of money, now starting to come back. So I think those are really good things, is that the structure of how money's flowing in the sector is changing, and that's a really good thing. And the younger demographics, maybe not giving as much, it's more expensive to live out there, but they have different ideas about what should be funded. So, this is a report came out 2 years ago, 3 years ago, decolonization, police brutality, racism, things like that are rising to the top. One of the really interesting sources that we draw from quite often is called Canada Helps. And they did a great little piece here on what different generations like to give to. And so they sort of broke it down by Gen Z up to boomers and see, okay, what causes really resonate with folks? And, some are really, mental health is, up there. Mental health and medical research tends to be pretty high for all. But as you get older, that's at the top of the list. If you're a senior, medical stuff or seniors issues are really, really important. If you're younger, things like climate change are really important. So when you're thinking about it, it's just, you don't just think everyone's going to give to you. If you're in an area that we're going to do a lot in environment, well, maybe younger crowds are the way to get money from. The sad thing is down at the bottom there, you have arts and culture who no one likes to give to, like 7% of the, that's not one of the ones that's there. So if I'm looking at this saying, I want to start an arts organization, but I know it's not going to be big on individual donations. So I need to maybe think a different funding source for this. A lot of times we kind of think, I've got a passion, I've got a cause, people are forced going to give to it. People get to do what they want with their money. And as different demographics, different interests, they're going to give it in different ways. But overall, as you age, your stuff becomes more about your own well-being, medical, mental health, and sort of seniors care. If you're younger, there's a whole bunch of things, but not across the board. There's different, things that people don't tend to care about. So the idea, again, we need to not just think of what we think is important, what do people out beyond us think are important about our nonprofit. Government funding is a big one. This is one that everybody wants. Getting some government funding is a big part of it. And as I said, about a third of the funding in the sector comes from this source. It's really important. It's good stuff. The nice thing about government funding, it tends to be longer term. So when you're getting donations or a grant from a community foundation, you tend to be chasing the next one. They're time bound. Government funding can tend to be longer term, but it comes to more restrictions, probably more work to get them. Once you're in, though, it can be quite good for you. So the type of work you do, government doesn't fund everything. There are things that government funds a lot of. So in seniors or mental health or health services, education, they have an obligation to fund some of those things. A lot of that is done through nonprofits. If you're a faith group or a sports organization, very little. Nothing for faith usually, very little for sports organizations, maybe 5, 10%, 20% of your budget, you're going to earn your money. So it just because you have a cause doesn't mean you're there. So government funds things that are important to the public good, and they're pretty restrictive on those kind of things. It's been kind of flat the last few years, so it's not growing as much. It's not been cut. A lot of nonprofits think they've been cut, and sometimes individual ones will be. But the pace of government funding is not kept up. And that's not unique to the nonprofit sector. I think education and other areas too have probably struggled that way, but it's tough to balance the budgets, and especially in this province with the stuff we had. But most of the money that we have from government sources come from the Alberta government, so that's the one. You may get some from the municipalities. FCSS is a body that does that a lot. Sometimes local towns or cities give money. The feds give some, but they tend to focus more on immigration and things like that. So the type of nonprofit you are is really going to dictate where your government funding comes from or not. Earned revenues is, I think, a really good one. And I like earning revenues because it gives me power to be in control of my future. I'm not beholden to a donor or a government or a funder. So I have a pretty mixed model in our funding model here. But it's the idea that we can sell things, goods, services, programs. There's no really one definition, but we can sell some things to make money, which is if it's compliant and it fits with our mission, fair enough, let's try it. So things like fees for sports and rec, or ticket sales if you're an arts organization, product purchases, people sell swag sometimes, or things like that. If you're a charity, though, it's a bit different. This is where I say charities be a little more restricted in their work. You can't just go and do anything to earn money in a charity. A little more license in a nonprofit, not total, but a little more. Charities can only do things that are related to their charitable purposes. So if my charitable purposes are to equip boards and staff with management governance tools, I couldn't just go start a coffee shop to pay my bills here. So that's not fitting my charitable purposes. I could sell a program on board governance and do that as well. That fits my charitable purposes with the earned income. So it has to fit with what you're doing as a charity, whereas a nonprofit probably is a little more gray area there. And just bringing that earned income that goes up and down. So if we're heading into these market areas that we're like businesses, and like any business, economic cycles are going to affect that. So if things are on the sort of recession, which we've got on the verge of here, then all businesses are going to suffer. And if I'm running a business within my nonprofit, that's going to be tricky. So this is why we think about funding models. Diversification is kind of nice because when economies sort of go down a bit, sometimes governments spend more. When the economy goes down, people donate less. When they sort of start to recover, you're going to get more donations, maybe more government funding, but it takes a while. So even if the economy is sort of hit rock bottom, it's going to take maybe a year or so for that money to start to flow back into the nonprofit sector. The nonprofit sector likely lags the overall economy of about 6 months or so. So when things start going down, everybody else is suffering. Nonprofits tend to have a little money in the bank or some contracts that last, so they'll drop later on. Conversely, though, when everybody else is recovering, we take about 6 months later to start to come back out of that trough again too. So we don't align with economic cycles quite as well as maybe other small businesses. So again, diversification on funding, thinking through what the pros and cons of each one may be, and then how will this affect you? Because even though these are the big buckets, it's how does your cause really resonate to those making decisions on whether to give you money or not or buy a service. We talk about social enterprise, and this is a form of earned income, and it is a way of selling things. This word social enterprise has no distinct meaning. It doesn't mean you can be an enterprise, like an entity, when you're a social enterprise, or a service. So it's kind of gray area. But it is that idea of selling services again. But it's really more core to your identity. So the idea of selling a service to make money from it. It can be both entity, I think I've spent these things. It's both an entity and a program. It's not really clearly defined. The idea that you treat yourself more like a business. Sometimes an earned revenue in the broader sense, that is ticket sales or it's fees for sports things. Those aren't really social enterprise. Social enterprises are really embracing a market model and selling something, sometimes very, very similar to what for-profit groups will do, but maybe you're coming under that in terms of price. So more nonprofits, more flexible, charities not. That's really quick. I'm going to stop sharing because I feel like I've talked too much. I don't know if there's questions. But I want to talk a bit, one of the things that's, we're just under Jennifer here. So it's, there's ways along the way here that maybe we can, those are some basic concepts. But that probably, I don't know if that met your needs, Jennifer. So if you want to talk a little bit about just your situation, we can just have a conversation about what we may do to sort of give you some insights, if any, into might help you more specifically.
I'm pretty sure the playground is set up through the Societies Act. Mm-hmm. How hard is it to switch to a different one?
Yeah, it's tricky. It's not impossible. You got to sort of go, why would you want to do that first? It depends on who the members are. So members are the ones that sort of control an organization. They're the ones that get to vote on things. And they appoint a board. That board is the legal representative of the organization. They may hire staff or not. So one of the first things you'd have to do is say, do we know who the members are? Because they're the ones who have to make that decision. And sometimes if you haven't been around for a while, you're not quite sure who your members really are. You get that a lot. I'm not entirely sure who all my members are or if they know their members. Why would you switch, Jennifer? What would be your reason for switching, perhaps?
Well, because I think that what our goal kind of is to do most of our funding is through having a secondhand store.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if we'd be able to do that through the Societies Act with what you were saying.
Yeah, technically, you're probably not aligned with the company, the size exactly well, because you're trying to do a commercial activity. The secondhand store is pretty clearly a commercial activity, right?
Yeah.
It's not impossible to do it. The process would be, we can sit down and we can have a one-on-one, and I can set you up with a free talk with a lawyer if that's appropriate to you later on. But the idea that you would have to wind down the society and transfer all the assets to the new entity. So it's not super complex. I don't think it's the worst thing to do. In your case, it may be the best thing to do. Does the organization now have a lot of assets or contracts or things that it has in place? That's where the complex comes.
They have money in the bank, but they have no contracts or anything like that. They've basically just been doing fundraising through community events and stuff. But I believe they're sitting on right around $30,000.
Okay.
They don't have any contracts or anything like that.
And do you have a board that's pretty active? Is the board pretty involved?
There's about 5 members that are left now, and that's it. And they're all part of the board at this point, because it was originally set up to get playground equipment for the school.
Yeah.
So that's what they were doing. Well, then some people in the school tried taking over the club. So they decided, nope, we're just going to become a community playground group. We're no longer the school playground group. So they separated from the school. And that is now, our school is actually closing at the end of the school year. So we're trying to get the school building so we can have it set up as a community center and stuff, because we don't want to lose out on this building when it's the biggest building in our whole community. We're only a community of about 90 people.
Yeah.
And we have a K-9 school that's closing in June.
Yeah, and so in some ways, it's not just the activity of starting a secondhand store. It's actually your entire purpose is changing here too, right?
Yeah.
So it may be, and this is something we can talk about offline if you like, the idea that maybe you need to start a new nonprofit that is a community center, that really is going to be the community center, and that the goal would be to transfer that $30,000 to the new nonprofit when it's set up. You can't transfer anything until you set up the new nonprofit. But it sounds like to me, and I'm not a lawyer, but the idea that the why, the purposes, the objects that we talk about are very, very different. So, and that may be something that I think your instinct is right. It's probably not the Societies Act. It maybe is something like the Federal Corporations Act, which is really straightforward. The nice thing about the Federal Act is you got to get your purposes right, your objects, the things you're doing, the reason for being, but it's really fast. You can incorporate it in a week, whereas in Alberta, it's months to do this, and to become a charity is like a year so long. So, if you wanted to reach out afterwards, we could set you up with a lawyer to talk through this question. She could sort of guide you as to what act and maybe what the process might be. But it's going to roughly entail starting a new nonprofit, getting a board in place, transferring the assets from the old nonprofit, this one, then winding down that old nonprofit, which isn't that hard because you're not a charity. It's not that hard to run a nonprofit, but it's just the members have to decide that. Okay?
Well, because they've already discussed that, because they hosted a community supper, and they had a local, well, I'll call him a community member. He threw a fit because what are they doing with this money? What do they do with all this money they raised? But a supper at the most raises $300 profit. So it's not like they're making huge money doing this. It was just more of a service to the community.
Yeah.
So he caused a great big scene and everything else about all this. So that at that point, most of that board decided they were done already. Yeah.
And it's tricky because people are going to have opinions weighing in. And when money's involved, people have a different eye on these things, obviously. But the board is the one's in charge. The board of the legal responsibility for the organization. You have to do what's best in the interest of the organization. If what's best is to wind it down, that's important. If the members have endorsed that, the members are different than the board, but if they've both endorsed that. But I think the point is there's going to be opinions outside that, whether they have validity or not. There's still people that have opinions. You got to manage that process. If you can say, listen, it's going to a better cause. We're going to actually do more of the work we were doing. We've got an opportunity for a building here. There's some funds to start it out, but we have a grander vision than playground equipment for a school that doesn't exist anymore. So, it's what's the alternative in my mind to this gentleman to say, okay, well, what do you want us to do with the money? Because there's no point building on a playground, that's not big enough just yet. Yeah.
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 Yeah, because like with the money they have, they're not getting any playground equipment, at least not anything large.
Yeah.
Right? Because playground equipment is so expensive.
Yeah.
And the only problem is I've sent all the letters into all of the different levels of government and everything about obtaining the school building, but I've yet to hear anything back.
Yeah, and that's the challenge. Yeah, but this building will be quite valuable, I suspect, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I don't want to end up putting in a whole bunch of my personal money to get everything going, only find out we don't have a building in the end.
Yeah. And
so that's kind of part of my concern as well.
The problem is, and that's one of the ideas of incorporating is chicken and egg, right? To say you haven't created this new entity yet, so they can't say, well, how do you take this seriously? The old entity doesn't seem to fit with what you want to do, so the credibility is not there either. So it's not super expensive to start a new nonprofit, right? Okay. The new one, it's not like you're not spending thousands of dollars here. It's a corporation fee and stuff like that, but it's not. It's that commercial side. But do you have kind of a business plan or not maybe too grand for what the new community center might look like, what it would look like in terms of what it would do and how it would serve community? Have you sort of thought that through, written it down in any way?
Yeah, I've thought through all of that. We'd want to use it still for like recreation center and stuff for evening and stuff like that. Also for our seniors to go walking and stuff like that. In the gym, right?
Yeah.
Because right now we have a group that goes to the community hall twice a week to walk.
Yeah.
But it's only for they only have an hour time limit 2 different days of the week, and that's it.
Yeah.
Whereas if we had the school open now, they could go anytime during the open hours, right? And do that. But also, I'd like to. We want to start like a community garden up there as well. And things like that, and to better support our community, because we're not a wealthy community and it's a very small community.
Yeah.
And we have people here who've been here, their families have been here for like well over 100 years. Like my family's been here for 110 years. Right? So it's
it's a great idea. I think it's a fantastic idea. It's one of the more creative ideas I've heard in a long time, to take a school that's sort of in demise, right? And say, how can we repurpose this into a community facility that's got a bunch of things? The challenge will be, I think that starting a new nonprofit is not that hard for you. And I think the vision for being a rec center, a community center, however broad you go with that way, that fits being a nonprofit really well. It allows you to earn some revenue, it allows you to get some grants. May not be charitable, but don't have to worry about that yet. But the challenge is that with the provincial government, it's just that how slow they're going to view this thing as an asset. They're going to view this thing as a multi-million-dollar asset they have and what they want to do. So you may not end up owning the school, but maybe there's a plan to get a long-term lease, which isn't the worst thing either. Because then
no, that would be fine too.
That's fine, but then you can sort of see what it would be cost. And government these days, not as much, but there are nonprofits that when there's been sort of surplus government buildings in the past, and I can picture 3 or 4 of them here in Calgary, there's more rurally, where government would make a deal for $1 a year rent. You get this facility. So they know that it's beneficial community. A year maybe you're responsible for upkeep and maintenance. That's the price you pay, but that's not the end of the world. Well, it can be depending on the building, I suppose. But it's there are some deals. It's just how do you get yourself in those conversations? And that's the really hard part for you, because you're a small nonprofit that doesn't look like you have much bandwidth behind you, but you have a great vision that would serve community. So how do you get taken seriously by government? That is it. That's a tricky one, but I think it's a good one. The upside is there's probably not a lot of other alternatives for this building, right? It's not like the people lined up to use it. Maybe
I only know of one other group that wants it, and it is they're trying to set up like a tutoring school. They don't want to do it as a private school because they don't want to go through all the hoops for that. So they're trying to set it up as a tutoring school. But they're hoping to have 12 children for this school year, because this is the first year they're starting.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem here. Like, this is a K-9 school. We have 34 students there right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's really the idea, but you know, there may be a nice similar, maybe it's not either or. Maybe it's not your vision for the community center and their vision for this tutoring school. Maybe, you know, they run their programs there and a couple of their rooms, doesn't sound like they need a lot of space, can use the gym every now and then. Like there are ways they could, it could almost turn to a multi-use facility where you've got a number of groups working within it. And that happens
Yeah.
quite often. You'll see that in some, especially smaller towns perhaps, like because facilities aren't needed all the time. So there may be some idea for some room for collaboration on this one. Do you think they have a lane into government that you don't? Do they have the ear of government that's maybe harder for you to get?
I don't think so. Because our school division here, they are very adamant that another school does not go in there.
Oh, okay.
Because they don't want to, because their student population is dropping as well.
Yeah.
And that, so they don't want all these kids homeschooling with support, right? So they don't want another school to go into the school.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of my advantage, but I've sent letters to the school division. I've sent to our local municipality, and I've also sent to the Minister of Education and the Minister of Infrastructure. And I've sent kind of what our ideas and what we'd like to use the building for is as part of my emails that I sent them.
Is there any local government in your area, like even a local councillor or maybe depending on the town you're in, there's different structures? Like sometimes it may be the more personal approach. I think the letter is great. You didn't get any response. That's not much we can do in that. But
the only ones I didn't get a response for, like I sent to my MLA as well, didn't get a response from the two ministers as of yet. But it's only been about a week and a half since I've sent them. And
yeah, yeah, you realize the government's going to work a lot slower than you're going to work too, right? They will.
No, for sure.
Yeah. So.
And because they changed the process now, so the school board, from what I was told, the school board has to send a letter to the Minister of Infrastructure saying that they are no longer going to be using the school.
Yeah.
The government has until they decide they don't want it anymore. But then from there it goes to our local county government. So then the county decides if they want it or not. And if they don't want it, then it can go back to the school division, and then the school division decides what to do with it.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because that's what our superintendent told me is the process and everything. So told me to contact the county. So I contacted the county and I sent him a letter just this last week, and he replied back to me right away and said that as far as he's concerned, that's up to the school division because it's their building. Because this is a new process just this year with how they have to go apparently through the Alberta government now if they're no longer using buildings. But nobody seems to know the process.
Yeah, and they'll ditch you to different parts, but there is a process, right? Alberta Infrastructure will own the buildings if they'll decide it, and there is a pecking order here. Does it go to other orders of the provincial government? If that's not true, it's go to municipality. Does it go to the school board after that? So all you can do is wait for that to play out. But you keep making your message out there saying we have a vision for this to be a community center. So at least they know there's an idea there. So then they have to say no to their idea. But in that time, maybe you're working on building the nonprofit, getting a new one in place and saying, we're ready to go. So there is a bit of an advantage that's being delayed. What you don't know is if one of those groups has got some other deal they're cooking up or they have some vision, but all you can do is keep getting your idea out there. And that's really all you can do. Because you know that, like it or not, government is the big hammer in this thing. They have all the power. And we wish we did, but they don't. So it's a fantastic idea. It's one of the best ones I've heard in a long time. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Well, folks, I'm going to sign us off here. John, if you have any thoughts, any wrap-up thoughts? I don't know how valuable it was. It's kind of tried something different. We're always happy. We're always here to do this stuff. This is what we like to do. So any closing thoughts, John? Oh, you're muted there, buddy. Yeah.
Not pretty much good. Yeah, I'm really curious how the things about nonprofits, especially the difference between nonprofits and societies, because I really get those two mixed up sometimes.
Yeah.
And yeah, and Jennifer, I guess good luck on your nonprofit. I hope Mike can help you with your stuff, I guess.
Yeah, if Jennifer, if you want to reach out, just in our Integral.org website, there's lots of ways to contact us. A consultation gets you directly to me, gets you a clinic to a lawyer. We just need a little more documentation from you. But if you want to keep chatting, we are always here for this, okay?
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
All right, folks, we're gonna sign off. Have a great afternoon, okay? Okay. We'll talk soon, John. Okay.
Okay, thanks,
Bye.
Mike. Okay.